So we meet again.
Yes, we do.
Ohio State.
How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm glad we have a bowl game and we have a shot at redemption, but I don't like that we're doing it virtually. We are in a press conference now. We have Pete Warner. He's talking from the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. No, they're not in Louisiana. They are not going until the day before the game. So it looks a lot different this year. The Sugar Bowl Media Days look like this year. It's not like anything we've seen before, but it is 2020, and we are still making it happen thanks to Zoom. We're really missing out on all the fun we had last year as the media teams came together.
Hold on a second. You talking about we have fun? Is that what we do on these trips? Do we have fun? Nah, Stephanie,
Bowl
we don't
games
have
are
fun.
an experience. And even the families are missing out. Like, we spent our Christmas in Arizona hiking up.
Camelback. Yeah, I almost died, by the way. I think you passed me as I was coming down, and I literally almost died like 30 minutes later. You were like 30 minutes from going up there. It's like, hey, did you hear about the guy from South Carolina that died? I was going to be that guy because I literally, like, my foot slipped one, and I literally was, if I wouldn't, I think God didn't want me to die at that point because he pulled me up, because that's the only reason why I was able to pull up from that rock that I almost fell down.
There are people, like, running up it with, like, a book bag with their kid on it. And I'm like, that has to be illegal. But yeah, we had so much fun. Like, the media members even got to go to Topgolf. We had our little media lounge. Hearing their stories at like 4 a.m. was the funniest thing. Mike Golick Jr. and I joke, we always go, Kevin Noon, because Kevin Noon.
I do too. Yep. That does. He surprised me with some of his comments. I'll have to admit that I didn't see those coming at all. But like you said, we'll leave all that there. What happens in the media
What happens in the media stays in the media, which is very ironic. We had so much fun. Even after our team lost. Like, I think everybody had a good time. And I remember game day specifically. And we can get into that about how this is kind of a redemption game opportunity for Ohio State. Very specifically, I remember first off, I had personal tragic news that you broke to me about.
I feel sick about that because I didn't know y'all were friends. And so I had no idea. So I'm just telling you, like, did you hear this? And I think at the time you didn't realize it was your friend either.
Hey, it's Carly McCord, and we are out here at the annual Suits and Sneakers event. Go Saints on Monday. Y'all get that win, okay?
In the landscape of Louisiana sports, no reporter worked harder or shined brighter than native daughter Carly McCord.
It didn't click with me. So at the beginning of the day, we had the night game and the Peach Bowl, which was for the 1 and 4 seed, LSU and Oklahoma. They were playing earlier that day in Atlanta, Georgia.
Oh my God.
5 people are dead and 4 others are in critical condition after a plane crash 1 mile from the Lafayette airport.
On her way to Atlanta to cover the LSU game, Carly was on the plane.
Just tragic news to report that we've just learned. LSU has confirmed that Steve Ensminger's daughter-in-law, Carly McCord, is one of 5 people who's passed away in a plane crash in Lafayette earlier today.
We got to the field and my phone wasn't connected to Wi-Fi or anything. I was just focused on my pregame prep and getting my stand-ups in and, doing my pregame ritual. I just am very focused and dialed in. And then I remember we were lining up for Ohio State players to run out to warm-ups, and that's when you told me that there was a plane crash and a reporter from Louisiana had passed away. And it didn't click with me because Carly wasn't supposed to fly that day. And I had just spoken to her days before, and we were all season long, we were talking about LSU, Ohio State. We're going to play in the national championship. We'll be on opposing sidelines. It'd be great. And it'd be in her home state. And then at halftime, I connected to the Wi-Fi. And that's when I saw her picture. And that's when the game drastically changed for me. And so I remember the first half. And then I remember going down to the field on the sideline. And everything was a blur. I had my breakdown and everything. The world was spinning. And I go down on the field and I see Ohio State trying desperately to get this thing locked in with the last final minutes. And that was when Olave was intercepted and he ran the wrong route and he took that really hard. And so I'm walking into a losing locker room with the heavy heart that I had with the news that I had, and then seeing these guys that I covered win all season long, and they were devastated. But I did catch Trevor's post-game interview, but specifically what I remember in my locker room, and I'm interested to hear yours, was it was 3 significant players. And I can get into mine, but I want to hear the winning side first.
Okay. Well, obviously the game was kind of like twofold. So, from a writer's standpoint, when we're writing stories, we start writing as the game's going along. So you're writing, okay, like the first half, what's going on, and Ohio State's doing this, and it's 16-0, and so you're thinking, okay, well, all right, well, here's my notes, and let me write this down because I'm gonna have to ask these questions, and then things start changing. Trevor Lawrence goes, the play happens where that allows Clemson to score on the targeting. That keeps that drive alive and allows them to get some momentum. But I thought the real game changer, in my opinion, was Trevor Lawrence's 67-yard touchdown run.
Yes,
because I think from
I
that
agree.
point, Clemson really controlled the game for the most part from that point. And that was really the big game changer. So at that point, my story kind of centered around that. So obviously, you go into 2 things. You look at Brent Venables and the defense. So I go straight to the defense to talk about how they, kind of bent but didn't break all night, kind of like they gave up yards, but they didn't give up points. They made them settle for field goals, and that was really the big difference early in the game. And so you go over there, and so Brent had everybody kind of huddled up, and he was talking to his whole defense, and he was talking about how, hey, nobody talked about us this week. It was all about Ohio State's defense. We went out there and we showed them, how you do it and how we play together. And it was pretty cool because he just got everybody together, and they kind of had their own little celebration as a defensive unit. And that was pretty cool to see. And then, Trevor Lawrence obviously was on the stand. So he was, in the press conference. I didn't get to talk to him until after he got back from the press conference. And one thing I'll say about Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne is those 2 guys will stay and talk, win or lose, the entire time. So last year after the national championship game.
Hold up. When have you ever seen them in a loss other than one time?
Well, with Trevor Lawrence, just one time. That's a good point. I
guess recently Notre Dame, but.
Yeah, and then the Alabama Sugar Bowl in 2017 was a pretty somber locker room in that one because they thought they had a good chance to win that game.
Sugar Bowl's brutal to you guys.
Yeah, Sugar Bowls and Clemson are not too sweet.
Sugar Bowls in Ohio State. You won the Natty last time.
That's right. So, maybe, so 2 things are going to happen in this game. That's 2 streaks are going to end. Either Clemson's streak against Ohio State's going to end, or Clemson's going to end its curse in New Orleans. One of the 2 are going to happen in this game. A curse
will end, fortunately.
One of somebody's curses are going to end in this game.
In 2020. Well, I guess it'll technically be 2021, but hey.
Hey, but we'll call it 2020. It's 2020 football season. But yeah, so I remember Brent Venables, obviously, and those guys. And then I remember just on the opposite side, Travis Etienne, who really at that point wasn't known as a guy who caught the ball out of the backfield as much, but he was so more damaging in that game, catching the ball out of the backfield. And then, of course, scored the winning touchdown.
Right.
That way. So, I remember, his offensive line kind of celebrating with him and just, them having that kind of moment together. And so, yeah, it was a little different experience. Like you said, I've seen a lot of those locker rooms, obviously. But that was a little different because they were such the underdog, even though they weren't a huge underdog. But they were, a lot of people didn't think they were going to win that game.
It was a 50-50 game.
Right. But I think a lot of more people lean toward Ohio State, because you guys were just so loaded with a lot of NFL talent. And Clemson just had a lot of no-names. You had Travis Etienne, you had Trevor Lawrence and Justin Ross on this side. But on the defensive side, a bunch of no-names other than Isaiah Simmons. And I think that was kind of why it was such a big deal for them, why you saw Brent Venables and them, because the defense really won the game, especially Nolan Turner. And it was great to see him because he'll tell you, and he did this week, how he sucked in that game, how he he got burned on a couple plays by Dobbins where he just had missed tackles and allowed big runs to happen. Or he was out of position in one play that allowed a big run to happen. Then he gives up the touchdown there in the 4th quarter that put Ohio State on top. And so he's sucking. And he was so bad, Dabo Swinney went and said something to him after he gave up the touchdown, you got to do better than this. You're better than this, Dabo told him. And Dabo really ripped him. on that. And then he goes out there on the last play and makes the interception to seal the win. So had a little bit of redemption. So everybody was giving him a hard time, but at the same time they were like, hey, but you turned it around, man. You turned it around. So that was pretty cool to see that too.
Well, I had a different locker room experience, and there were 3 names that stand out. 2 of them are very prominent in this week's game. The first person I saw entering the locker room was Chris Olave, and I didn't even see his face. His face, like if people were watching the video, it was like this. And we had like 20 minutes in there, and I don't know how guys think when they see girls cry, but when I see a guy cry, I feel awful. Like I could tell it tormented him. Like, and to this day, it still eats him up. And so that was the first person I saw right when I entered the locker room. And they're respectful. They were heartbroken, but they were willing to talk to the media. And Chris was just overwhelmed with he was just devastated with how that last play ended up. And he took full responsibility. He felt like it was his fault they lost. And then the next person I saw was Chase Young. And I looked at him, and he gave me a look that I had never seen before, and it was just defeat. Like he tries to do as much as he can in his power, and it was obvious there was a lot that was out of his control. And he knew his future was bright. He knew that he was, the world wasn't over, that he was going to go on and have a great NFL career, but he felt like very defeated, it seemed. And I think he was still trying to be the teammate to be there with his buddies, but you could tell like helpless, like there's nothing I can do in that moment. And so that was another face that I remember. And then I stopped and I spoke with player development, Ryan Stamper, and I don't specifically remember what he said, but he's great with the guys, and he definitely is like a big brother, but like he can help guide them and helps them out a lot on and off the field. And so he's very involved, and I saw him, and he was upset, but he was willing to talk to me, and I told him about my friend that passed away, and he said something like his initial response was, after he was part of this team that just lost, he said something along the lines of, football's bigger than us, and as upset as they all are after this loss, like there's bigger things out there. And to Carly, football was so special in her life, and that moments like this are the highs and the lows. Like it brings the community together, whether it's the media, the team, the staff. That was something that he said that I was just like, okay, yeah, like I can get through this like locker room and get through interviews and get my notes. And that helped me just like push through, because everything was just a blur. And then after he gave me those wise words, I saw Justin Fields, and he was a complete pro. After being with this team for one season, he's the last player that everyone passes in the locker room where he was sitting. And he shook the hand of every single media member. And it was just like the utmost leadership that I had ever seen. And that stood out throughout this season as well. So Chase is no longer there, but the other 3 that were involved were highly significant in the team getting to where they are today, because they had their season canceled and lots of highs and lows. Their families couldn't go to games, and Justin Fields' leadership was superb throughout getting them through this season, and even with the hiccups, the team around him. And Sean Wade's another one who wants the redemption, but Chris Olave in particular, I think him coming back after not being able to play in the Big Ten championship will be hugely significant. So the way last year ended for them, how this season has gone with the pandemic, this game means the world to them.
Interesting, and that's going to make it, to me, more interesting for this game, because, we kind of were talking about this before we got on, was about the, how's Ohio State going to handle if things don't go well? Because when you're so built up and you want something so bad, and then you come to the realization you're not going to get it, or things aren't going the way you maybe imagined it would go, how do you respond? And so the thing I'm interested to see, especially with Ohio State being a younger team and being a team, as we talked about also, that hasn't had the chance to kind of, grow together in these moments and face these kind of adverse situations, how do they respond if Clemson comes out and it's boom, 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 14-0? Because one thing we've noticed about this Clemson team, when they come out and they get to a quick start, it's over. I mean, no matter who they've played this year. I mean, it's like all of a sudden you think you're in the game, and then all of a sudden, wham, they just hit this streak where they just like kick it into another gear, and you can't match it. No matter what you do, you can't match it. And you look up, and next thing you know, it's 31-3. And you're like, I thought we were good, a la Notre Dame. So that's the danger you have, to me, when you put so much into something. And I've seen this over and over again. I've seen it on both sides. I've seen the revenge factor work for a team, and I see the revenge factor work against a team. So with this Ohio State team, you just don't know what you're going to get right now. And if they get to the point where they are, behind in this game, how are they going to handle that adversity? That's something I'm going to be watching for and paying attention to.
Yeah, usually the underdog, chip on the shoulder, and these big games works well for Ohio State. Usually, just like we saw the last time they were at the Sugar Bowl, they came out and took down Alabama. But with that said, the whole team was talking about, Sean Wade spoke before the Big Ten championship. We can't just win this game. He told his teammates, we have to blow them out. And so they felt the pressure going into the Big Ten championship, and it didn't happen there. And I know we didn't have some weapons. The pandemic was a factor, and maybe Justin was in his head, but we didn't see that in that game, which is not like Ohio State. So usually I would feel confident going into a game as an underdog. I feel like Ohio State thrives on that. They weren't an underdog against Northwestern, but they knew they needed to have a big game, and they didn't. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting. When I first found out we were seeded for another 2-3 playoff game, I spoke to a few of the Clemson players, and I shared with you before we started recording that two of them had different reactions to this rematch. And Travis Etienne was I spoke to him the day that the matchup was selected. And I shared with him, it's very ironic that we lost our very historical, traditional rivalry game against Michigan. And, the fan base took that super hard. The team took it hard. But then we are seeded to the team that we lost to the year prior, haven't been able to defeat, and it feels like a rivalry game. And he was very empathetic to the Ohio State team. And because I told him, I think that they took that very hard. They really would love this redemption again. And he was like, yeah, that's what any team wants, is to be able to come back. Amari Rogers responded saying, oh yeah, they're going to hype this up so much on the press conference today. He said, no, I don't think of it as a rivalry, but it is interesting how it came together. And we were also talking about how this location could be difficult for you guys. So you guys may have a shot at breaking this curse as well.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting the way Clemson and Clemson, as I remember, lost their rivalry game too with South Carolina, which was the second longest continuous rivalry in college football, with 111 straight years they've been playing. That was, they got that news earlier than you guys did. Obviously, they got it in August when the SEC says they weren't going to play, and I got a whole different story there. Don't let me get going on the SEC in my opinions. Anyway, and that was disappointing. And, not only for the players and the coaches that they weren't going to play that game, but it was disappointing for the media who cover that rivalry, such as myself. And I've written history books on this rivalry and stuff like that. So, it has a special meaning to me. And so for that game not being played is disappointing for a lot of people in the Palmetto State. And, and so for Clemson, yeah, that's kind of good for them too, because this kind of game is to have this, because, they had the little rivalry with Notre Dame, but everybody knew, even Notre Dame knew that Clemson was just way better, especially if they have all their horses. I mean, let's be honest. I think Notre Dame knew they played the best game they could play all year against Clemson on November 7th.
Great game. It was so hard. I had my press conference for Ohio State, and you guys kept pushing overtime, and I'm like, I wanted to watch that game so bad.
It was such a great game. And they played an A game, and Clemson didn't. And Clemson also didn't have Trevor Lawrence. He was out because of COVID-19 protocols. They didn't have Tyler Davis, a starting nose tackle. They didn't have James Skowski, their starting middle linebacker. They didn't have Mike Jones, their starting strong side linebacker. And they lost very early in the game their starting safety, and Landon Zanders. So they had five starters that, out of the game already, basically early in that game. And yet still went into double overtime and actually had the lead with, 22 seconds to go in regulation, had the lead and a chance to win the game. And so you knew.
And that's with Notre Dame's best stuff.
Yeah, that's with Notre Dame's best stuff. Notre Dame had all their players. They had a bye week. So Notre Dame was rested, everything. And Clemson nearly beat them with their JVs, as everybody said. And so you knew going into that ACC championship game, yeah, this ain't going to be this Clemson's going to win this game easy. I think everybody knew it outside of Notre Dame. And I think to a certain level, Brian Kelly knew it because he would the looks on his face during the press conferences leading up to the game, you could just tell he's like, he would say stuff like, he's going to say it because he wants his players to believe they can win, but you could just tell he didn't feel it or believe it. That's my opinion anyway.
That's not a good motivator for a team.
Right. So Clemson, in other words, like they knew they were going to beat Notre Dame. They knew they were just going to beat the pants off of them, and they went out there and did that. Well, this is a different level. So this is kind of like, I know Amari Rodgers won't admit it as a rivalry, but they like beating Ohio State. They like beating.
Well, it's always high stakes.
They like beating.
They like winning the high stakes games, and to get to the national championship, they always have to go through Ohio State. And one year we didn't even give them a game. We won't talk about that game. That one's
because I like you. I won't say what Clemson fans normally say.
I know, but
with that game.
but okay. So before we start recording, I said it would be fair for Ohio State to win this game on some bad calls, even though I believe Clemson is the better team this year. All because Ohio State was the better team last year, and calls are the reason why they didn't win it. So we could make it all equal and even if Ohio State wins this year on some bad calls, even though Clemson's the better team.
Look at you trying to rationalize everything. You're just trying to put it in a nice little
You can justify the win last year by losing on some bad calls this year.
As a lifelong Steelers fan, and I've had my moments, sometimes the ball bounces for you, sometimes it doesn't. You just hope on that day the ball bounces for you. Okay, so, so I feel your pain. I know where you're coming from. But, you just kind of you don't know what's going to happen. But I do know this. That ball is, like, not a good shape. And so it's going to bounce weird ways, Stephanie. So it is what it is. And that's just the game of football.
And this game is so interesting because of we were talking about it amongst the media on the Ohio State side. We don't need to go through all these, we don't need new topics because we have enough to work with now with all the storylines we've had because of Dabo saying Ohio State is the 11th ranked team in the nation, but he's playing them as a third seed. We got Coach Day making some little indications about the sign stealing. And because we talked about that one and it was not necessarily a full out, I'm calling you out, but it was like, okay, I'm aware.
Yeah. And then you got the Day last year kind of going off to the media about the bad calls and stuff and, how it was unfair and all that stuff. And so that's playing into Clemson's hands. They're like, oh, so they don't think we can beat them without the referees. Well, so Clemson's kind of playing that card too on their side. And, we'll go show them. It's the same way when Clemson played Alabama back in 18 for the national championship. Alabama beat them the year before, and Clemson had given them all the credit in the world for beating them, saying, hey, they beat our pants off, blah, 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 blah. And then when Clemson came back and won it, Alabama was like, well, this happened, and this guy was out, and they just made these excuses. And Dabo used that as his calling card to say, oh, okay. I mean, he did. He didn't say it publicly. I know he said it to the team and all, and he, it's like, he let them know, oh, okay, so these guys think that we're not good enough to beat them if they're fully healthy and they're this. They have excuses built in. How about we just go out there and show them there's no excuses? And they beat them 44-16.
I love the coaching tactics. They even said that, sometimes maybe Urban would say, oh, well, Herbie said Ohio State has no defense. Come on, you guys got to show, even though Herbie may have not said anything, they'll just say, well, this media personality is doubting you guys. So I think it's always so funny, all these tactics they pull. But we can get into this game about there's a lot of differences from last year. And I think the defense on both sides here is a big I wouldn't say concern on your end because they are young, but they're great. On my end, we lost a lot of talent, specifically in the secondary, and we've only got 6 games of experience this year. So this is an interesting one because while you guys are young, they have some experience from this year.
Yeah, they do. So here's the thing about Clemson secondary, and the Clemson fans, if you ask Clemson fan about their secondary, they're going to be like, oh, they suck. Oh, man, these guys can't cover. They can't cover anything, So that's a Southerner doing a Southerner there, by the way. So anyway, but it's not true. They've been banged up all year. They've had different lineups. This is crazy. Clemson, of their starters during the season, they normally will have 16 starters given injuries and things like that during a normal year. This year, because of COVID, because of just injuries, Clemson's had a rash of injuries, especially on the defensive side of the ball this year. Excuse me. They've had 23 different starters on defense this year. 23 different starters. That's amazing. Now, the good news for Clemson on that is those other guys were freshmen and sophomores that didn't have a lot of experience, and all of a sudden they have a lot of experience, and they're very talented. And so that secondary, which has got Darion Kendrick, who I think is going to be a first-round draft pick, whether he comes out this year or next year, we'll find out. And then on the other side they got Andrew Booth, who is a freak of an athlete and can just makes one-handed catches. He looks like he should be playing on offense with the kind of catches he can make. And both guys are tall and physical. They can really get after wide receivers. The safety, Landon Zanders, is coming on. Nolan Turner, now he'll miss the first half because of targeting. How ironic is that?
Yeah.
Clemson starting safety is going to miss 2 quarters for targeting against Ohio State. I think that's irony at its best.
No one asked Sean Wade about that. I wish, because he spoke.
And by the way, I think Sean Wade's number 24, right? Nolan Turner's number 24. So, I'm just saying.
The irony of this game is insane.
God has a sense of humor, people. This
is wild.
Yeah. So, but basically getting into it though, and then on the defensive line, they're so young. You got Miles Murphy, defensive end, who's from a talent standpoint is already better than Cleveland Farrell. We know how good Cleveland Farrell was. Brian Brzee, remember that name because he's going to be like a top 3 pick in a couple years from now. This guy is unbelievable. One of the fastest guys I've ever seen coming off the line. Once he gets his technique down, which he kind of has, he's going to be really good. He was a defensive end in high school, so he had to move inside, and he's learning how to play the 1 technique into 3 technique. And so he's having to learn, and he's kind of got that now. But it helps having an All-American defensive tackle right beside you, and Tyler Davis, who, as I told you before we got on, is such a big thing for Clemson to have him there. And so you got this guy, and then you got, we'll find out if we're going to have Xavier Thomas in that game or not, or if they're going to have, KJ Henry, who's more than capable, Justin Maskell, who started most of the year. Those 2 guys have really been really solid on that other side of the defensive end. Also young, talented guys as well. So you got all this youth in the defensive line. And then at linebacker, you have veteran leadership, James Skowski, Balin Spector, and then Mike Jones, 3 guys that are, been in the program a long time, kind of the rocks of the thing with Nolan Turner in the secondary. So they kind of get everybody lined up. And so it's a mixture of old and young, but the young is so talented that they can take over a game. And that's what you saw against Notre Dame when you saw, Breezy and Murphy and those guys just making play after play after play. And then on the back end, just nobody's open because they do such a good job covering. So they're really good on defense. They're really good. I think of the 4 teams, they're the best defense in the college football playoff. And I think that's going to be proven as the playoff goes along. Man, when they're getting after it and they're healthy, I don't know if there's anybody that can. It's definitely. I went back and figured out when they have their original 11 starters playing, they're giving up less than 7 points a game, less than 2 yards per carry, and like 66 yards a game rushing. And it's like
this is where an Ohio State fan will come in and say, "Well, who are you playing in the ACC?"
Well, they might say that, but you look at the Notre Dame game, and Notre Dame is a playoff team. They're a really good football team, and they held them to 263 yards. And Notre Dame all year hasn't had a game under 200 yards rushing, and they held them to 44 yards rushing. With all those guys back, and so And that's a very good Notre Dame offensive line. I mean, they got seniors, two All-Americans on their offensive line. I mean, those guys are good, and Clemson made them look like chumps because they're just so talented on the defensive front. And that defensive front for Clemson is going to be every bit as good, if not better, than the one they had 2 years ago with Christian Wilkins and all those guys.
Ohio State's similar on that. They have a veteran linebacker group, but that secondary is still untested. And Shaun Wade specifically came back for, a redemption run and to get a national championship. He also wanted to move over to that slot position, get some tape to show to NFL teams. And we haven't seen it click the way we expected just yet. I mean, he's had some moments, but I think he'll be a key factor in this game. Most interesting matchup in this game, I think, is Ohio State offense up against that young but very talented Clemson defense. And especially when you have Olave back. We saw him at practice. Coach Day said, we're pretty sure he's going to be good, but I feel pretty confident that he's going to be back. The other concern, if we're going to talk about injuries, we spoke about it before we start recording, is Justin Fields' thumb. Last year, there was concerns on the knee. He started wearing a brace in that Michigan game, and he moved up to a bigger brace for the Big Ten championship. And that was, throughout the media week that we had in Arizona, we asked him that question a lot. And eventually he didn't want to talk about it. And, he's like, oh, my coaches don't want me talking about it. This time around, it's been very interesting in that if it's a concern, they're going to nip it in the bud. You get asked about it. Okay. Just brush off. But with the knee, there would be some elaboration. Yes, it really bothered him, but he played through it. The thumb, we don't know much about. And right after that Big Ten championship game where his passing was questionable against Northwestern, it took him a while to start to run the ball. So there was concerns around Day's play calling there too. And then we still hadn't seen what Trey Sermon was capable of yet. Now we know, but that game just kind of was a revealer, what happens when we don't have Chris Olave and, why wait so long to run the ball. Justin Fields' thumb, maybe it wasn't as bad, leading up to that game. Maybe that's why Coach Day felt confident in him passing, but for whatever reason, it wasn't working. And he took, right after the game, he said, I don't want to blame my thumb. I'm at fault, but he's, just he's a leader. He's accountable. That's a concern of mine, is especially after, I remember right after the Big Ten championship, as the players were walking off, Josh Myers said it was, COVID sucked and it's hard to recover from. And so we don't know how players adjust to getting back. Everyone's different. Everyone has different symptoms. Everyone feels differently when they have the virus. And so we hope that Chris Olave jumps right back in and Justin Fields has his go-to guy. But, they don't have those game reps as many, and all they can really do is practice. And there's a short amount of time before this game, but they're kind of used to that this year, I guess, because every other game was canceled for them. But
it's a normal week for Ohio State.
They're used to having a game every other week. But yeah, and Coach Day, it felt frequently that he was saying, yeah, we didn't have much time. And I feel like they wanted that time to help with those adjustments because I know Olave will be very close into that day marker and to being available, but we feel pretty good. He's going to be good to go. And Fields will have that back. But again, it's been a while since they've played a game together. And that's where I had the concern, especially when the Clemson secondary can definitely prevent the passing game.
Yeah. I know we'll get into keys in a second, but you're right. I mean, first of all, the finger, let's be honest, if you're a pitcher or if you're a quarterback in football, you don't want any part of your hand that you throw the ball hurting. And that's a big factor, and that is why he was 12-27. I'm sorry, that is why. It hurt that he didn't have his number one receiver, but, there's talent on that team, and he just couldn't get the ball to him. The ball was going into the ground. You could tell it was causing him issues.
It was not like him. It didn't look like Justin Fields.
It's 70% completion percent guy before that. This is not him. And so that is a factor, and Clemson's going to test that right away.
Yeah,
you have to.
Right out of the gate.
Right out of the gate. They're coming right after that thumb. They're going to tell guys to go swap because see if the ball, if it is kind of hurting, definitely, as that's going to hurt his grip. Well, that means you can maybe make him fumble a little bit more. So kind of go for the strip sack, kind of do things of that nature. Get your hand on that hand. See, test it. Let's see how strong it is, And I'm sure Ohio State's going to give them a nice little shot before the game starts.
Yeah, I was going to say Fields will battle through anything. Like, he'll be in so much pain and he'll bounce right back up after a hit just so the Ohio State fan base doesn't have a panic attack.
Yeah.
So because I think right out of the gate, when you're the quarterback at Ohio State, you cannot give a second on the ground to this fan base. They will freak out. So and I think Trevor even does it too. Like, they just jump right back up. Yeah. And so if he takes a minute or a second longer, that's, I'm like, ooh, it's not good. And that happened once recently, but the thumb is just, we don't know much. We don't get to go to the practices and watch like we used to.
They were real short this week with their comments when we asked Day and when we
Coach
asked
Day
Fields
too.
about it. Yeah, they both were real short. Oh, he's fine. He's going to be good. And you're like,
yeah,
really? I mean, because you said that about the knee last year. Do I believe what you're telling me? I mean, so if you're Clemson, now you prepare for it like it's good.
Well, with the knee,
but you go after the hand.
You know what I mean? Like, he had other, and I guess now they have Sermon, but that was one game. I mean, it was a historical game, but for whatever reason, Coach Day after the Big Ten championship said he wouldn't have changed his play calling. He would have waited to run Trey Sermon just because they hadn't seen that yet. But that's where I'm like, ooh, what's going on? So we'll know more, but the media days didn't give us much information in that regard. And at Arizona, we got to go to their practice. So
you could literally see what was going on there.
We're speculating here. Right. But
y'all got to see practice. We see special teams.
Yeah, well, your team's heading out Wednesday. Our guys are staying here till the day before the game.
Well, I'm going to tell you why that is. Because we talked about
they want to go to the movies.
Well, that's it. There you go. They want to go see Wonder Woman 84.
They want some jambalaya.
By the way, don't go see
Creole.
that. Anyway, save your money. Get it on HBO Max, whatever. It was not very good. I saw it the other day. I'm a big comic book geek, as I told you. So I was very disappointed. But anyway, we won't go into movie reviews right now. No, they're going down there, though, Stephanie, because – Clemson is a very young football team, and when you remember this, I don't know, maybe you haven't, because I remember because I guess you haven't been to New Orleans yet for that game. When you go into the Superdome, it is an awe kind of factor. Like, I mean, when you go out, it's different than any stadium you see, even bigger, even different than Dallas. And I've been to Dallas, obviously, several times. And so it's even bigger than that. It's just kind of awe-inspiring. Like, you look at it and you're like, whoa. And you think about the history that's there and the guys that have played on that field in the Sugar Bowl, and you're kind of like, it's pretty cool. And because the way the dome is up there, and so you're like looking up there, and it's really different to look at and see. So the first factor is you want to get that out of the way. And that's why they're going to go and they're going to do a walkthrough on Thursday or Friday or whatever day that is, Thursday. They're going to do a walkthrough on that and kind of get that out of the young players, kind of give them perspective. Also, maybe go catch a couple punts. Get your punt returners used to it, because it's a different look because of the way the dome looks. So you want to do that. So that's why they're going to do it. But the main reason is Dabo's got a young team, and he kind of wants to get that. Okay, here's the Sugar Bowl. It's great. Let's get the awe factor out of the way so you guys can play football.
Well, it won't be full because of COVID. So that.
Yeah, and it won't be full of LSU fans, and that would be big too. Because my goodness, last year that national championship game, my goodness, that was unbelievable. How loud that place was, and those LSU fans. And dude, I kid you not. So when LSU won the national championship, I'm sitting there finishing up my story, and they're doing the whole thing down on the field and everything, right? And so you would think that it was a home game in Baton Rouge, because when Clemson has won them in years past, like part of the stadium's got Clemson fans still there, and they're celebrating. I mean, Baton Rouge is 40 minutes up the road. I mean, it was crazy. I never seen anything like it, where basically all the Clemson people left, and it really didn't even make a dent in the in the amount of people that left the stadium. It was just all LSU, and it was so loud. I'm like, gosh.
See, that's special. That's special.
They've won all 4 of their national championships in Baton Rouge. I mean, in Louisiana.
That's awesome.
All 4. So if the national championship is being played in New Orleans, it's probably going to be played. And the one they lost, by the way, was also in the Superdome. So they've played for the national title 5 times. 4 times they've won it, all 5 games in the Superdome. Or in
That's
New Orleans.
awesome.
That is.
That's
And it's
awesome.
weird, and it's crazy. You know.
And you
so-
guys couldn't break that curse, so maybe you can't beat the Sugar Bowl curse.
yeah, they're 0-2 against LSU now in New Orleans. So I don't think Clemson wants to play LSU anymore in there. But that's interesting though. But yeah, so kind of go back to that. That's why Dabo's doing it. Kind of get the all factor out of the way with those younger players, which is a big deal. You know, when you go to those different places. I remember they did the same thing when they went to the Cotton Bowl. Because of that big screen TV and stuff like that, you wanted to kind of get that out of the way right away and let them see, hey, this is a normal stadium. You know, it's 100 yards, it's this wide, everything's the same. Just don't, I always think of that movie Hoosiers. Have you ever seen Hoosiers?
Mm-mm.
Oh my gosh, young lady, tonight get on Netflix.
I'm writing it down.
Get on Netflix and watch Hoosiers. But there's a scene in there where Gene Hackman takes his players into it's a true story. And so they're the smallest high school in the state of Indiana. And in Indiana used to play a 64-team tournament. So each team was to have the regions, each classifications, and all the champions would come together and they play.
Is this a football movie?
It's a basketball movie.
Okay, I figured. I'm like, Indiana, it's got to
yes.
be. My dad's from Indy, so
okay,
big basketball state.
Yeah, big basketball. So you go in there and they play it. It's different than what we had. Now they don't do it this way now, but it's different than what every other state does. So anyway. So the smallest school in the state this particular year, in the 40s, I think is when it was playing the biggest school in the state for the state championship. And the smaller school won. They go into this big gym in Indianapolis, though, this big arena. It's got like 15,000 people or whatever. And so first thing he does is he takes his team out there, and he gets a measuring stick, and he gets a guy on his shoulders. He says, all right, tell me how far it is from the ground to the rim.
Oh. And
he's like, 10 feet. He's like, okay, tell me how far it is from here to here. And they're like 15 feet. He's like, okay, just like it is at home. And I thought that was
Dabo's inspiration?
It must be. I don't
movie?
know.
Oh.
It might be. Knowing Dabo, probably is.
Okay, so the final keys to the game for the Sugar Bowl. Secondary, but I'm also putting in Shaun Wade's got to have a great game. And I know that the factor of being ejected from this last matchup may give him some spice and some fire there. I also have Trey Sermon. He's got to get the run game going like he did towards the end of the Big Ten championship. I think he can do it, but we've only seen one game of him in that way. So I know, and to put it up against Clemson. So those are my 2 ones. And then the Fields' thumb, now that his weapons are back. So those are my 3 main things for Ohio State. If they can turn one of those up, and Fields can play, it's just, how is his thumb going to be? We either need Sermon to run like hell, or we need Wade to really stop your passing game.
Yeah, so on the flip side of it for Clemson, I think when you look at this matchup, I think the number one matchup to me is Ohio State's offensive line against Clemson's defensive front. I think stopping Sermon in the running game is key because I think, A, they want to test out that thumb and see if Fields can do it. And B, I think they're going to go off the same game plan they had last year against Ohio State, which was keep Fields in the pocket. Even though he had a bum knee last year, their game plan was to make him go through his progressions, make him have to look for somebody in the pocket and worried about, okay, where's the pressures coming from? Don't allow him to get outside the pocket because if you watch Justin, things I've noticed from watching them play, he's so good outside the pocket. He's so good at creating plays when he gets outside that pocket. And he's not necessarily looking to run, and that's what makes him so dangerous because he can do it, but that's not what he's doing all the time.
Now
so
he might, because he had bad knee against you guys last year. This time we didn't. I feel like they didn't want to run him because protect him so that he survives the whole season.
Right.
Now I feel like they might let
they're
him
going to
go.
run him in this game. They're going to run him because I think, A, they're going to have to because Clemson's going to be keying on Sermon, and they're not going to let the running game beat them. They're going.
And we don't know Master Teague right now. We don't. His availability's question mark.
Okay, so another reason. So, so they're going to test that, and they're going to want Justin Fields to stay. So, very similar game plan you saw last year against Ohio State. Even though Dobbins killed them, and they're so glad they're not seeing Dobbins because
I knew that'd be such a factor.
As good as Sermon is, they're not worried about him going out into the flats, catching screen passes, and killing them.
Dobbins was unreal, yeah.
Yeah, he's like what you guys have to worry about this year with Travis Etienne.
Yeah.
Etienne can go out there and he can really hurt
But
you.
I feel good about our rush defense. It's the passing game.
Well, that's where Etienne can get you.
In the Fiesta Bowl, Ohio State held him to 36 yards,
Yep.
but it was in the passing game there they got him because he had 98 yards and 2 touchdowns through there.
And that's when he wasn't as good as he is now. So anyway, that's one key is keep Fields in the pocket, make him beat you from the pocket. And I think that's going to be the key for Clemson. They did that last year. He threw 2 interceptions. He could have thrown 5. Clemson dropped 2, and they had an interception that was returned for a touchdown. Remember, called back. So that's 3 other interceptions. So
that was another way we could have won. But.
Yeah, they did affect him last year a lot with the way they played defense behind. They didn't blitz as much against him. And I'll be interested to see if Venables does that this year. I think that surprised Ryan Day, to be honest with you, that Clemson didn't bring as much pressure as they normally do. They didn't do that. So I'm interested to see how they play that in this game. And then I'd say the next key is on the other side, Clemson's got to run for 100 yards. If Clemson runs for 100 yards, you guys are in trouble because that means they're going to be able to get the play-action game going, and that's going to allow them to open up down the field. You mentioned the secondary is a weakness for Ohio State. I think Clemson sees that obviously too. They're going to try to attack it. Clemson's receivers are good enough. They don't have Justin Ross this year. They don't have – they're probably going to be without Ngata, and we'll find out about Frank Latson if he can play. But that's 3 starters they've played with all year that didn't play. I mean, that did not play all year that they were counting on before the season started. So, they've learned how to deal with not having those guys. And Trevor Lawrence does such a great job just finding different guys, his tight ends. That's another factor this year. Clemson's tight ends are more prevalent, so that's going to be a key. For Clemson is like if they run for 100 yards, then Clemson's chances of winning greatly increase because they're going to be able to get that vertical passing game going, and that's where they're so dangerous. And all of a sudden you look up and it's like it went from 7-3 to 34-3 just like that because they're just hitting plays over the top. And then lastly, you mentioned about the Ohio State wide receivers, 2 very good wide receivers. However, after that, nobody. So that means he's got 2 targets. To me, that's what that means. So that means Venables, knowing how he thinks, his goal is going to be to limit those 2 guys and make somebody else beat them.
I think Ohio State definitely has the receiving weapons. In the Northwestern game, we didn't really get to see that, I do think, because of the thumb.
Yeah.
I was thinking about some of the key guys that we lost to the NFL draft on both ends of the ball here. Like, you guys can't really scheme against Chase Young because we don't have him anymore. Isaiah Simmons is out, and you guys don't have T. Higgins. So there's a lot of
coordinators are like, yes, thank you that those guys aren't in the game.
I think as a whole, I think the star power has shrunk from last game. Mm-hmm. But just the way it's all working well, I think that losing those big names didn't affect you guys as much as it has affected Ohio State. Or maybe it's because we haven't had the games to develop the guys we do have. But your young talent came in. Yeah,
I think it's the latter, what you said. I think not only playing 6 games, it's a big deal because most teams don't start really gelling together till week 8 or week 9. Yeah. And so, you guys are behind the 8 ball on that. And there's no doubt, like I said earlier when we first talked about this, that is an advantage to Clemson, that they know who they are. So that is a plus for Clemson. There's no doubt about that. But the health issue is a plus for you guys at the same time. Ohio State's, they're feeling a little, they're getting a little healthier. They got a little more gumption than Clemson does, where Clemson's got a lot of guys that are banged up that are already going to play hurt. You talked about Fields playing hurt. Clemson's got a ton of those guys playing hurt. That's where Ohio State has the advantage. So if it is a 4-quarter game, that goes to Ohio State's advantage, in my opinion, because they're healthier.
That's the thing, yeah. So I was looking at the spread, and as we know, both of our podcasts are sponsored by PointsBet, and so that's where I was looking at the line here. They have Clemson as a 7-point favorite.
So, yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be a 7-point game.
I don't think so right now. Like I said, I think a lot of things got to happen, and we'll see as the game goes on. How's that finger? We got to see that. How's Clemson stop the run? Do they continue to be as good as they've been doing that? Then that gives you a little bit. How does Clemson run? Can Clemson run the football? That gives you a little bit of indication because as good as Clemson has run the ball lately, let's be honest, their offensive line, if you want to know a weakness in Clemson, it's their offensive line. Yeah. They just started to gel. But when you look at these 4 teams, remember I said Clemson's defense was the best of these 4 teams. Clemson's offensive line is the worst of these 4 teams. Okay. And so that's going to be a big issue too. how can Clemson can they run the football? Can they get Etienne? Etienne don't got to rush for 100 yards, but the team as a whole has to rush for 100 yards.
And Lawrence can run.
Lawrence can,
get on
but
his
I don't
feet.
think
We saw that last time.
Yes. He introduced himself
I remember.
to everybody.
I remember.
67 yards. You're like, where did that come from?
Our interior defensive line is actually solid, but if you get past that, you're golden.
Yeah, you're talking about. Oh yeah. Ohio State's defensive line is very, very good. It might be the most talented that Clemson's played to this point, including Notre Dame's, which is very talented as well. So, that's going to be a good matchup. And I think, early on we'll get a good feel. I think by the end of the second quarter we'll have an idea who's going to win this game.
But these two teams, with the coordinators they have in place, they can mix it up. If something's not working, they know how to make adjustments. Yeah.
And
I think Venables does that really well.
He's the best.
Yeah, I think he can turn her around.
I think the first 1 to 30 wins. I think both defenses are pretty good, especially in the trenches, and I think that's why I don't think it'll be a shootout.
I don't think it's the first to 30 because I do think whoever's down heading into the second half will light it up in the second half. So I think Clemson will be up, and then I think it's going to come down to the third and fourth quarter.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I'll just tell you that. Another key to this game to look at is I think Clemson has faced adversity. They lost. They lost at Notre Dame. They faced adversity, and they responded. We saw how they've responded. We don't know how Ohio State's going to handle it. Again, how they're going to handle adversity. We just don't know.
A lot of the leaders on the team really kept the chemistry going. Like, these guys are completely bought in. Like, we didn't lose a single guy to opting out. When COVID strikes, like, next man up. So I think that Ohio State can definitely overcome adversity, but there's some things that, like, are out of control. Like, we can't heal Fields' thumb overnight, and we can't get one guy into the game after he tested positive. So I think that they're great with adversity, but there's a lot of just variables that I think that they're getting fed up with that they literally can't control.
Yeah, I hear you, but they haven't had, like, every game this year. Ohio State's been in control. Even the Indiana game, they were in control. They led 35-7. Now, they almost let it slip away, but they were still in control of the game.
I don't think Northwestern they were.
Well, they were down 10-6.
They couldn't get it together. They were down 10-6
at halftime, but you just knew if they just run the ball. Come on, Stephanie. We all watching. I'm watching. I'm like, just run the ball, Ryan. What are you doing? Just run the ball.
I don't get why it took so – yeah.
I mean, everybody – so I felt like even
– But I don't think we saw that coming. I don't think we knew what Trey Sermon was capable of, but I don't think we saw him breaking Eddie George's record. Like,
no, I didn't see 15 yards or 31 yards coming. No, I didn't, but I knew –
I did see that one coming.
What? I was like, why in the world are you throwing the football? Just run the ball. They can't stop the run. I mean, it was just gashing them. I mean, they were running – you could take Mack trucks up the middle of that field. Those lanes were so wide open. So, they still controlled the game. Clemson's going to present challenges for them that I don't know if they've seen yet. And Clemson, remember, Clemson and Alabama and even Notre Dame, there's a different level of talent with these teams. And, Ohio State's one of them. And so Clemson, though, has seen that some already this year, and they've known how to adjust to it. They've been punched in the face, and they've seen that. How does Ohio State handle a team who's just as talented as they are when they get punched in the face? How are they going to respond? How are they going to handle that adversity? Like, so let's say something's wrong with his hand. Well, I'm going to be honest. If they can't throw the football, if you're one-dimensional against Brent Venables, you're done. You're done.
And you guys are more than prepared for the run game.
Right, and so that's what I'm saying. You can't be one-dimensional against Brent Venables. Everybody's like, well, you look at how LSU beat Clemson last year and what they did. Burrow was amazing, but Burrow also had his worst game all season long was against Clemson. Got sacked 5 times. His completion percentage was low, is the lowest of all season. He nearly threw a pick 6 in the game. Nolan Turner dropped it. It would have been a pick 6. But why did they win the game? Well, because they could run the football, and they kept Clemson off balance so much that Clemson couldn't say, okay, we're just going to load up and blitz the tar out of you and make you confuse the quarterback and all. They couldn't do that. They had to sit back, play zone, and Burrow was able to pick them apart. That's how you beat Clemson. If you can't run the football and you get to one-dimensional and you can't make those passes because the windows are going to be really small, it makes life miserable for an offensive coordinator calling against Brent Venables. So that's the key, and that's why I'm saying that finger is a big deal. because he can make those throws if he's healthy.
I think that's the biggest factor in this whole game. It's his thumb.
Again, just like his knee was last year. And it really is. That thumb is a big deal. And if he can make those throws, it's like a pitcher. It's like if a pitcher gets a blister on his finger, he may not, well, it's just a blister, I can handle it. But then when he goes to throw that ball, it's not the same juice. That's why they have to take him out. And it's the same thing with the thumb with a football, because you're not going to get the same velocity on the ball. So when you're playing Clemson or Alabama, and you know how they play defense, they play press man, and they're not going to give you very big windows. If you go back and look at the passes Joe Burrow completed in that game, they were spot on passes, and Clemson was in good coverage. It wasn't like the guys were running wide open. I mean, they're in good coverage. He was just making these pinpoint passes. Well, that's what you got to do.
He was
that's
like a freak about his accuracy.
Yeah, such a freak. Well, that's what you got to do to beat a Nick Saban or Brent Venables. That's what you have to do, because they're not going to give you open windows, not many of them. And so if your thumb is hurting and you can't put that kind of velocity on the ball, that could be a factor. I'm just saying it's a huge factor. So you're right. Probably the number one thing in this whole game, it comes down to the thumb of Justin Fields.
Agree.
It really does.
I agree. So if you had to make a game selection score, talent-wise, just speaking on talent, without the other factors, I think Clemson.
Yeah. Okay.
By 14.
14. Wow, me and you are going down the same path. That's crazy. And I don't think it's like 14, like they dominated and controlled the game. I think it's like 14, you get a late touchdown to put it away.
I think Ohio State has a huge fourth quarter.
Yeah.
But there'll be a play or something. And I don't even know. I feel like it's going to come down to Fields. I hate saying that because I know the pressure is like finally getting to him. Mm-hmm. I think it's all on Fields' shoulders right now.
Well, I think his thumb is, like I said, is a very important part of this game.
It's all on his thumb, actually.
Yeah, it's really his thumb. But I think, going back to Trevor Lawrence is going to be big in this game. I expect him to have a big game. He's got a chip on his shoulder. That national championship game is still fresh in his mind. He talked about it a little bit today. How much that's motivated him this year. I just think him now I don't care what he says. He's not going to say it, but I know him as a competitor. He is not happy that he's told he's the third best quarterback in college football. So he's going to go out and want to prove that. It's like, basically he got punished for getting COVID. That's basically what it was, because his numbers are good. His numbers are very good.
Yeah, but you saw the team did without him. So it's like almost like extra proof, like, okay, you need this kid,
Yeah, exactly. And that's what the Heisman Trophy is about, right? Most outstanding player. So I think he's going to have
he deserves the Heisman. I believe that.
Yeah, I do too. I really do. I think, Heisman's missing the boat on this.
Mainly thinking about like his whole college career is kind of what I'm thinking. Like,
well, I look at it just as the player. You just said it.
You should only look at it through the season. But yeah, I think that he's a solid leader and all of that.
Right.
So.
And you saw it in the Notre Dame game. What did they do without him in a big game? They lost. Right?
Mm-hmm.
What did they do when they had him? Well, the team they lost to in overtime, they beat by 24 points with them.
Yeah.
And it really wasn't even that close. That just tells you how big of a deal he is for Clemson. And so, to me, that's what makes him different, because you can't look at numbers and stats. Everybody gets so caught up in that.
I know.
I'm more like, look at the player.
I think even the committee does that. Like, they just look at stat lines. It's like, hey, the eye test.
Stop looking at box scores. Use your eyes.
Strength of schedule even, like.
Yes. Stop doing those other things. Like, use your eyes to tell you what's up. And then that's all you need to do. And that's why I don't have any issues with Ohio State in the playoff, because I do think I don't have any issues with it. I understand Dabo's rationale talking about them being qualified.
Do you think he'd say it if they played 6 games and Ohio State played 13?
Yes, he would. I do, because he stayed true to who he was. Remember, as he mentioned, and I remember he got a lot of slack for it when it happened. He voted Alabama number 5 and Ohio State number 4 in 2017, and he was going to play Alabama in that game. Coincidentally, it was in the Sugar Bowl, by the way. Coincidentally, they lost. But he stayed true to who he was, because he said Alabama shouldn't get in that year because they didn't play for a championship. They didn't even win their own division. He said they didn't even play for a championship. They didn't win their own division, was his point. So he's like, they didn't win their own division, not their own conference. So he said he didn't think they deserved to be there. He thought Ohio State, who won their division and conference, deserved to be there that year. So he sticks to who he is. And, and he said he would have voted Southern Cal out of the top 10 too, if they would have been 6-0. If they would have won the Pac-12. He said they would have been voted. He said they would have been 12 behind Ohio State. So he doesn't disrespect Ohio State. He just said they're not qualified. They didn't reach the max.
And I get that point of view. And, know, other college coaches agree, but they won't say it. Like, they don't have the – yeah.
Dabo has the –
I agree.
He has the what do we call them things?
Idiosyncrasies.
he has those things. So he's going to say what he wants to, and he's always been that way, man.
He's earned the right to as well. Like when
he's earned the right, but he said those things definitely before he even earned the right. Dabo has been the same throughout his whole career. When they were,
I love the consistency though.
Yeah, you love the consistency because I've been here for all of it, and so I remember when he first got the job and all that went down. This guy is the same all the way through. It didn't matter who he's playing. If he wanted to say something and he thought you were doing it wrong, he'd tell you. And so that's who he is, and you admire him for it. He sticks to his guns. So
all right, so we both are thinking Clemson by 14 on this one.
Yes, I'm thinking 34-20.
Can we catch up at halftime and see where we stand?
So we can,
after I see like one more half from Ohio State, just because I've barely seen them play this year.
Yeah, we can. We could do that. We could do that definitely. It'll be fun. So.
If you guys like the show, please leave a review and a rating. It really helps me out. And follow me on social media at Steph Otey, STEPHOTEY. Have a good one, you guys. I'll see you next week.